Well, tonight's topic is the silent service, the submarine corps. We've been sitting outside of one of the best assets that a museum could have, a Gato-class submarine from the World War II era. The U.S. Silversides is one of 77 submarines that was produced in that class. And that was the most prevalent submarine of the United States used during World War II. There was other classes of subs, some predecessors and some successors, which were a little bigger, better. But the brunt of the silent service was the Gato-class submarine. They were built between 1940 and 1943. And they were built primarily at 3 different shipyards. One, Mare Island in California, which was a naval shipyard. Portsmouth, New Hampshire, which was another naval shipyard on the East Coast. And then a local connection right across Lake Michigan, Manitowoc, Wisconsin. The Electric Boat Company made these submarines, and they sure pumped them out because Electric Boat seemed to be more efficient than the naval shipyards. And sometimes it takes private industry with a little motivation to make things a little quicker. That submarine outside there is nearly 312 feet long. It is larger than any of the German or Japanese subs of the period. Its beam was a little bit over 27 feet wide. Why is that so significant? Well, for a couple reasons. I think we as the Americans, we always like to build them a little bigger and a little better. Well, this was a classic case of building bigger and better. And this was clearly something that we were able to do well and do well at. And those submarines, when we were on our backside after Pearl Harbor, became the brunt of one of our offensive weapons on the high seas because it was used primarily against Japanese maritime shipping, disrupting the flow of supplies between the various islands that Japan had conquered over time. Remember that Japan had extended itself quite a distance from its home shores. And it was critically essential for us to disrupt those supply lines to make sure that the Japanese would suffer deprivation. So when they took islands farther and further away from Japan, let's make them suffer the cost. Well, the U.S. Silversides was apt at knocking out shipping. It was the third leading submarine in World War II for knocking out ships. You can see on its side all of its successes. But that whole class of submarines, without their contribution, what would the war effort have looked like without the subcorps? Would have been probably a lot different, and the outcome may have been in question. Well, the life of a submariner is a difficult life. They're a unique breed. It's not an easy job, right, Paul?
Not difficult, but easy. Take that back.
Take it back. It was easy, Paul?
It could be rough.
It could be rough. I think Paul tries to downplay it. What do you think, Don? Was it easy or hard?
When you're 18 years old.
You didn't know better, right?
No better.
That's right. So if you came from a place where you're 18 and maybe you were from Iowa, a submarine could be a good place, could it?
I thought you meant now.
Oh, not now. No. Now it's probably much easier. Well, imagine yourself in that submarine with 60 other people. Now, many of you have been on that submarine. 60 of you on a tour, being deployed. Most of the time, you're traveling underwater. 60 of you. There's no privacy. Everybody knows your business. You sleep, hot cot. Everybody gets their turn in the rack. There's no private time for you. You got to get along with people. And if you didn't get along with people, there isn't much opportunity to change your mind because you can't go anywhere. 54 crew, 6 officers. Now imagine, these are diesel subs, those generators, those motors going. And if you ever come on Memorial Day, you'll hear them turn those engines on, go into the sub, and you'll know the noise. You can't even think half the time when that racket's going on. And imagine being underwater with that noise, the warmth, the humidity, and yes, they were air conditioned for their time. Now that didn't mean you were cool. That meant that there was no humidity generally dropping from the ceilings to short out the instrument panels. They didn't care about your human comforts. Most of the time, that crew was running around in their skivvies. That was your uniform. And you couldn't be claustrophobic because guess what? When you went underwater and you didn't like tight places, there was no option for them to come back up and deposit you somewhere unless you wanted to swim in Davy Jones' locker. And that wasn't going to happen. So that submarine, that class of subs, its contributions, its ability to make a difference is legendary. And we're going to hear a little later from our executive director, Dr. Frank Marzak, about the exploits of a particular sub, not the Silver Sides, but another sub that has a local connection and some of its exploits because of what it went through. 20 Gato-class subs perished, were sunk. Think about that. 1,200 plus crew died. On average, 1 out of every 5 submariners in World War II met a fate of death. Yes, they got paid a little more. Yes, they had to take a lot more responsibility. It was a perilous task. And these guys had a great love for these boats, a great affinity. It's almost like their girlfriends or their wives. They talk very proudly about their ship, their boat. And all those boats are named for fish. The Gato class was named for a tiger shark. So that submarine not only became their home, it's their protection. Because guess what, folks? If it's blown up or it doesn't work, you can't walk home. It's unforgiving. So keep those things in mind as we proceed forward in our discussions tonight. What efforts one has to take to serve on a submarine. And, you know, the silent service, God bless their souls. And God rest those souls that didn't make it, because their contribution was a big factor for our victory in World War II. Now I'm going to bring up our executive director, Frank Marzak, who's going to talk to us about one of these particular subs and how important it was.
Thank you, George. Before I get into that particular sub, let me just add a few comments to other things that you may be interested in. And you will learn about these if we have your name, address, email address, whatever. Because we have some additional things going I want to make sure you know about. Let me go back to the Lost Boat ceremony that is here on Sunday, the 25th of May. It begins at 11 o'clock. If you've never attended it, it is a patriotic, religious, honoring the memory of the over 3,500 men who went to their deaths on 52 submarines that took them down. It was quite the ceremony. And we indeed do have, and proudly say that we have Senator Carl Levin coming to speak with us this year. That's kind of a big deal for us. Senator Levin is chairman of the Armed Forces Committee. I believe this is his last term in office, and he willingly agreed to be here. July 4th weekend will be a big doings out here and in the community. You may start reading about some of those events. I'm not at any liberty to tell you more about it, other than we're going to have some big doings going on out here. We will be opening an exhibit called the European Theater. It'll be in the back area. It will honor, right now, Joe Byerly, who you heard about. His family will be here. And another gentleman who fought in the Battle of the Bulge, was captured, and eventually made his way back to the United States. That will be the European Theater. And then in the fall, we're opening an exhibit called Women in the Military. And Peg Maniotis has been seeking out various stories and features of that. And we found that we have some right downtown in the building of the American Red Cross, right here in Muskegon. Women in the Military. So that's going to open in the fall. Back to the Civil War history and trip. In about 2008, I took my two grandsons, ages probably 10 and 13, to Gettysburg. I had to convince them to go with me by saying I would take them to the Football Hall of Fame in Akron. They love the Football Hall of Fame. I took them to Gettysburg, we did the tour there, and the older grandson really loved it. The other one said, you know, I like the Football Hall of Fame better. The younger grandson then took this course at MCC from Curtin, George, and came to tell me how great it was compared to the lousy trip I took him on. Lance. I understand. I understand. I think I'm planning to go with you. Let me make sure I'm covering everything here as we have our last evening with you. Oh, the other questions that have come. Besides Mondays at the museum, what are you guys thinking about, guys and gals thinking about for January of 2015? Well, here's my prediction. It's going to be cold and it's going to snow. Let's begin with that. And we have a variety of topics we are entertaining. Some of you have made some suggestions to us, so that would be our plan. Not for any commitment on the part of the museum or the presenter, but many of you were here when our guest over here, Colonel Janowski, spoke to us a month or two ago. And last week I asked him if he would be interested in presenting at a future date. We have nothing nailed down yet. And his eyes kind of lit up. And he said he did his master's thesis on the Bay of Pigs, and he would love to talk about that. Am I quoting you? So we just have to find a date. And that may be a very, very interesting topic that I'm sure some of you would find great interest in. Besides that, he's a wonderful presenter. So, Colonel, we will get with you. Let me then move into this presentation tonight. And the clicker I have here, and we say it's working, so Mary Lou, if you would go ahead. And this is a story of tragedy and survival. The USS Flyer, a submarine almost identical to the submarine that we have out here with the silver sign. Now, my background, I am not a historian. So cut me a little slack. Okay, I'm not a historian. Okay. And in this moment of confession, apologies to Curtin George, as I went through my research on this and found it very fascinating, even though I've known about the Flyer for a couple of years. And my further apology for, I really didn't enjoy history in high school. College, okay, but it wasn't my forte. So Curtin George, public apology to the two of you. But at the same time, I'd like both of you to come up here and join me for a minute, please. Curtin George, please. This all started in about the summer of 2012 when the gentlemen here were with me and others as we hosted a World War I traveling museum. It was a big deal. It was a big truck. They were going to 75 cities. It was quite the museum. We started talking about history classes out here. And both guys said this is a perfect laboratory. And here we are. 2 years later, how about a big round of applause for my two colleagues here? Thank you. And all I have to do is buy them breakfast at Carmen's or at the Cherokee, and they're happy, okay? We spend big around here. But gentlemen, thank you. I know it's a labor of love for you, but you've put a lot of time and effort into this. Let us go to the next one. Well, let's see, I've got the clicker here. Should work, right? You did it? All right, okay. As I think about history, and I paraphrase it into a two-syllable word, if you will, maybe three-syllable, hyphenated, his story or her story. It's all about people. You have your own history or your own her story. They're about nonfiction. I think they're better than reality shows, even though I don't watch many of them. They're not tempered by anybody behind a camera or a screen. They come with the joy and sorrow of life, sometimes very sad, sometimes very joyful. And as George Sherman said, Civil War fame, war is hell. War is hell. Read about that. Now, a little digression on the business of Sherman. For those of you Civil War buffs, we know that Sherman went to Georgia, created quite a stir, caused a lot of destruction, correct? So with you students, some advice. Back in my old MCC days, I had a colleague whose son, along with some friends, went on a spring break driving to Florida. Excuse me. They were going through Georgia, and they were going pretty fast. A state trooper in Georgia pulled them over, cautioned them, warned them, told them to slow down, let them go. No ticket. They were happy. They went down the road a spell. They got off at an exit ramp, went to a restaurant, had lunch or whatever they were eating at that time of day, got back on the expressway, and got back up to the same speed. The same trooper pulled them over. Basically quizzed them and said, all right, guys, what do you think you're doing? I've already stopped you one time. What makes you think you can drive through Georgia this fast? And the driver said, well, Sherman did. They spent the night in jail. So, my dear college students, do not smart aleck with a Georgia State Police officer, okay? Maybe go to the next one? All right, my history, short history, as it pertains to this story, is that I'm the product of a father who was an iron ore miner in the Upper Peninsula, underground iron ore mine. He was exempt of the war because that was an industry that they really needed the product from. My two uncles served in the Army, one in Africa, one in Italy, one in the Navy, I believe on a destroyer. And you know, I never really ever asked them about their service, and I say, shame on me. I should have known better. And maybe from this class, you will ask individuals who have been, better get away from that, who have been in the service. We have all these freedoms, and I know I'm probably lecturing or sermonizing, but sometimes we just take it too much for granted. It's not right. Look what's happening overseas. And 2 weeks ago, when we had Martin here, one of his concluding remarks was that anti-Semitism is still alive. And you read what happened in the Ukraine or in the Crimea the other day, when the unknown at this time government or people in charge are asking the Jewish people, not asking, telling them, you will register, you will pay a $50 fee, you will tell us what your resources are if you're Jewish. And then, just was it last week when a fellow went into was it a nursing home or another kind of home and killed 3 people that he thought were Jewish. I believe they were Christians, but I think that's what he thought. Prophetic words. It's not dead. The world still has people who are a little on the edge, feel they're in control, feel they can take and do what they wish to do. We have people who protect our freedoms like that, and let me introduce one of them to you. Rob, would you please? Rob Crumpf. Rob is a veteran of Afghanistan and Iraq.
Come back this way.
Come back. Oh, there we go. Okay. And he's been attending all of our classes. He supports what we do here. He's volunteered here. And he's now working at the LST. And he's going to take that ship and he's going to make it good and glamorous. And we're going to work together with him. Give Rob a round of applause. Next one, please. So, as closure, at a young age, as we grew to adulthood, we ignored, and I'm not sure if it's fair for me to say we, including you, but we ignored, we didn't pay homage to those who sacrificed for our freedoms. And it's still going on, our freedoms. We, my friends and I, we played Army. You probably played Army. Yeah, we played Cowboys and Indians and all those other games. But we played Army in the hills and the bluffs around our house. It was a game. But it's it's not even a game, it's serious. Please? Many of you, like me, saw many black and white movies back in the 40s and 50s. Famous actors, some of you recognize names, some of you don't. John Wayne. He won the war in some cases, right? I mean, he was single-handed, John Wayne won. Early 70s, we saw movies like D-Day, Longest Day, Private Ryan, and the list goes on and on and on. So that brings us to attention, if you will. It brings us to deal with some of the realities, and it seems like the more recent the movies, the more brutal they are, compared to some of them that from the 40s and 50s were cleansed a little bit. So if there's reality TV or reality movie, there is some of that. Please. Fast forward, year 2000. I did work at MCC, and in about 1995, it was Sharon Vanden Heuvel and a few others, created an exchange program with a technical college in Stuttgart, Kaufmannschule. It is a business and technical school. So MCC continues to this day to have a exchange program with Kaufmannschule. So, and each of us paid our own way and went to Germany. And I learned quite a few things. Stayed with the director of the school. I did not know that the Germans like their beer warm, but you know, it wasn't bad. It really wasn't bad. We did not talk at all about World War II. In the year 2000, it was history, but individual, private history, if you will. At no point berating that. But I needed to find out more. So I did. I ventured off all by myself, made my own arrangements, flew from Stuttgart to Frankfurt and then to Paris. And not knowing a word of French, my first name is Frank, and I know that's a dollar figure in France, but that's about as far as I could get with that. And got to Paris and took off on a train to Caen, which is, of course, not the big famous film center in France. First city on the coast of Normandy to experience the invasion, I believe, by the British and the Canadians. This was like a bucket list for me. After all those games I played, after all those movies I saw, what is this Normandy really like? Please. So I rented a car. Yeah, I almost got a traffic ticket, got caught in a French speed trap. Looked at my license, said American or however they put it in French. Get out of here, no ticket, thank you much. I did follow the coastline, and my last point up there, at the American Cemetery in Omaha Beach, I cried. I sobbed. Caroline was playing God Bless America. It really crushed me. I'm not embarrassed to stand here in front of you and tell you that. It really, really, really got to me. Look at this next slide. Now, young people from the college. If you put yourself back in that era, you are about the age of most of the men who are buried in here, and probably some women. You're about that age. And if you weren't there, or would not be there, it could be your sweetheart, it could be your brother, it could be your father, it could be your uncle, it could be your cousin. Now think how hard that would hit home. Look at the thousands and thousands of people who are buried because they fought for you and me. Next slide, please. As I said there, I don't know anybody buried there. I walked it. It's just overwhelming. And in a few slides of words, that's my past as it pertains to understanding or appreciating what these brave men and women did for us. And this is such a, I don't want to say minor point, but this is one continent, one country. Doesn't even take into account what all happened in the Pacific and the Southeast. Please. Now, going to this topic of tonight, the USS Flyer, Mark Fazackley, who's chairman of our board, invited me to visit with Mr. Nelson Jacobson from Grand Haven. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the Grand Haven area, JSJ is a pretty significant corporation in that town. It's been in business for quite a few years. It started as a Grand Haven brass foundry, I believe is the official name of that company when it did start. The story is about Nelson Jacobson's father. Now, let me go back. Nelson Jacobson is the current CEO of this company. Nelson is probably 50-ish in that era. His father, Alvin, the story is about him and what he survived in 1944, while 71 members of his crew went to their instant death. Please. He was the son of the founder, typical high school student, as many of you were not too many years ago. He finished his senior year as president of student council. He enrolled in the University of Michigan. While at the U of M, he joined the NROTC, Naval Reserve Officer Training Corps. He was studying engineering. He was working towards his graduation, but about 2 years into that, and in the NROTC, the Navy instituted a crash course to become an officer, to go to the Navy. And that's what he ended up doing. In 1943, being interviewed by a couple of admirals, not really sure what he was getting into, but he was ready to go into the service. He had two brothers also who were in the service. He was commissioned an officer in 1943. He was assigned to the submarine service. And there's that Mare Island again. And in a description of his trip across country, and much of this I have learned, read, studied in a book called 8 Survived, which we sell, of course, in our gift store, but we're running out of them. And it's a harrowing story, written by Douglas Campbell. Anyway, he wanted to join an active submarine, not one that was in dry dock for a long time, and one that was going to be active in the war, and he, to his pleasure, was assigned to the USS Flyer, the Gato-class submarine that George was talking about, very similar to the Silversides outside. And you may know this about, maybe you don't, submarines are named after fish. The Flyer is a fish found in southeast USA. Does anybody know where the Silversides fish is found? Okay. Yes. Yes, sir.
First off, okay. I shouldn't say this, somebody who loves submarines as much as I do, but they made great fish bait. They were little, small, beautiful, so beautiful. I used worms. I'd rather use worms than those. Anyway, small fish, might be an inch, inch and a half. I think I saw one close to 2 inches long, but I never saw a creek or a rill or a pond or anything in my part of Kentucky and Virginia and West Virginia that wasn't alive with silversides. You could net them if you wanted to net them, but I like to watch them. On each side they had a little silver strip, and there's all kinds of reasons why they flash the sides like that. Looking for a mate, looking for a fight, I don't know. But they were so beautiful. So that's my story about the Silversides, and I'm sticking with it.
Thank you. Here's some inside information, students. That's going to be a question on your test, your final exam, okay? I was hoping you'd look it up, but Paul has taken it for you, so there you are. Now, the way you describe those, Paul, they kind of sound like smelt, which we used to bucket out of Lake Superior in the cold spring. Anyway, okay, let's go to the next one. May 1 of 1944, he is now an ensign. assigned to commissary duty. Not unusual. A new officer on a ship is going to get some kind of duty, some kind of responsibility, may or may not be in line with his past. He didn't know much about foods. It was a pretty traditional household. His mother was the cook, and he loved what she made. But in terms of feeding 60 or more, 70 men on a submarine, this was new to him. But he relied upon the experience of a chief who had a lot of work there, and contributing to the fact that submariners said they ate the best in the Navy. Is that true? You ate the best in the Navy. Okay, I believe that. I was on an aircraft carrier myself for one summer. I did not want to go back because the food was just not that good. When they diluted lime Kool-Aid 3 ways or 3 times, it was like, this is not going to go. It was, well, I won't say what. But let's go to the next one. As George said, it was dangerous. Lost approximately 20% of the crewmen by the end of the war, highest percentage of any branch of the military. That doesn't mean in numbers, that means by percentage. And since October 18 commissioning of the Flyer, 9 submarines had been lost, 647 men lost their lives. Let's go through the litany of them. The Wahoo, October 11, 43, 80 men, never heard from again. The Corvina, crew of 82, November 1943. The Sculpin, leaving Pearl Harbor, 74 men, never heard of. However, 21 survivors at the end of the war, half of who had survived the depth charge attack. Go ahead. American submarine, the Capelin, sub and crew of 78 men, never heard from again. January 3, Scorpion, 76. He had a very successful record, never heard from again. The Greyback, remarkable 9 patrols, sunk 22 ships. Japanese airplane saw it surface, sunk it, 70 men. The Gudgeon, built at Mare Island, named for another fish, of course. Been in battle for 2 years, 78 crew had begun its 12th patrol. They were never heard from again. Brothers, fathers, uncles, cousins, sweethearts. When a submarine goes down, it takes a lot of people with them. This goes to the story of the Flyer. On August 13 of 1944, the Flyer received orders to proceed towards Baalbek Island, which is in the Pacific, and therein lies the story about to unfold. We're going to go to a video that will describe some of that for you. There's your Omaha Beach for the submariners. What does this say to you? What does this do to you? I'd like any student who has a reaction or thought to comment. Yes, sir. Yes.
It's when I look at their ages, when I look at the ages of some of those guys, I'm just thinking, wow, that's like me and my friends and some of my friends that graduated a couple years ago. It's just kind of brings perspective to it on how young they were, and I just can't imagine my friends and myself even being in the Navy and dying at our age.
It's a bit surreal. When you read, if you buy this book and you read the history behind some of them, who, of course, many lied about their age to get in. So they're very young when they got in and went through the training. They were young people, young men. Ralph? Whoop, okay.
It brings to my mind my sons and their age. I just got done reading the first 4 voyages of the Silverside's history, and they were all basically the same age, except for the captain. He was a little older. But history is about people, and it's about people that we can relate to. And it just boggles my mind that we have to repeat it so often.
Words well spoken. We're going to continue with this. It goes into more of a video right at this point, and it's self-explanatory. So, go ahead.
August 1944. The world was at war. The oceans had become a fearsome battlefield. 1 in 5 U.S. submariners was killed, making it the U.S. military's deadliest job during World War II.
Submarines in World War II had a major impact, particularly in the Pacific, against the Japanese. Actually, submarine personnel were only made up about 1.5% of the entire Navy's personnel, but they accounted for 55% of the actual shipping sunk during that time.
One submarine, the USS Flyer, was traveling near the Philippines in the early hours of August 13th when Commander John Crowley received a top-secret communique. Intercept a Japanese convoy traveling down the Palawan Passage. To reach the convoy in time, the Flyer needed to travel at top speed through the nearby Balabac Strait. The Allies were cautious of Japanese sea mines lurking below the surface of this route, but another submarine had identified what was believed to be a safe passage earlier that May. As the Flyer entered the strait, Ensign Alvin Jacobson came on watch.
So I was on what we call the cigarette deck, which is the after part of the conning tower. You could see land on all 3 sides of you. We hit the mine. We're going at 15 knots and the bow went and just drove it right straight down. So I was in the water swimming and sucked under, and the only thing I could think of it is that propeller's coming around. Okay, so I swam to the surface. 15 seconds, maybe 30 seconds at the most, and it was gone. You were swimming.
15 survivors, many of whom were injured and covered in diesel fuel, gathered around Commander Crowley to determine their bearings.
So they know that there's islands on 3 sides. They have 3 options. One is Comoran Island, which is only 2 miles away, but it's tiny. If they miss it in the dark, it's 40 miles to Borneo and you're not going to make it. There's Balabac Island, which is very large, due west, but the Japanese are known to have a garrison there. So the chances that they're captured are almost 100%. And then there's this string of tiny islands to the north. So they decided, we'll head north, hopefully we can find food and water. We are not ready to surrender to the Japanese yet.
Captain Crowley got us together, and we made the gentleman agreement that everybody's for themselves. You're not supposed to ask for help or anything like that.
For many, injuries and the exhausting swim proved too much.
Lieutenant Casey, for some reason, he couldn't swim on his stomach, he could only swim on his back, and he couldn't see. And this one time he got quite a ways from us, so I went over to get him and I said, just rest and put your feet on my shoulder and I'll push you back to it. Oh God, he fought, he wouldn't think about it. Less than an hour later, I was looking for him and he was gone. He just swam off to one side and gave up.
Dawn came, and of the 15 men who surfaced after the explosion, only 8 remained. At last, a small island came into view on the horizon.
We did see the land, and we decided which island we're going to go to, swim to. And we all decided that we could swim at our own rate now, but we'd all head for this one island.
In all, the Flyers swam for 17.5 hours, traveling an incredible 15 miles. They had removed their clothes during the swim and now had no protection against the blazing tropical sun. The beautiful coral sliced into their bare feet as they waded ashore. Exhausted, the men dug in for a cold night on the beach as temperatures plummeted. The next morning, the men rose to their feet, bloodied and sunburned. With no food or water on this tiny island, they knew they needed to keep moving. Fueled by their unyielding thirst, the Flyers strung a makeshift raft together using bamboo. They set out that day for a succession of small islands. Their ultimate destination, the island of Buk Suk, a journey that would take the men 3 full days.
Now we could see the big island. And on the big island we could see a house. And we could see that the house was abandoned. We looked out back, here was a cistern that was collecting rainwater.
The men approached the cistern, desperate to relieve their blistering thirst. It was the first drink of water they had had in 5 days. The men slept in the abandoned house that night, and in the morning cracked open coconuts to eat. Out from the jungle, 2 native boys suddenly appeared.
Then they motioned to follow them through the jungle. Well, you would think twice, but we didn't think twice. We said, okay.
The boys led them to an abandoned schoolhouse, lit a fire, and cooked the starving men a meal of rice and fish. As they began to eat, a group of armed natives emerged from the jungle around them. The men feared they had been betrayed.
They had a couple shotguns, spears, and blowguns. And they started coming, got about halfway across, and out of the beautiful English, they said, "Welcome to the island of Bugsuck."
This was the Buk Suk Bolo Battalion, guerrilla fighters loyal to the Allied forces.
His instructions were to take us to the battalion headquarters on the island of Palawan.
There they would be turned over to the U.S. Coast Watchers, a covert group of soldiers who provided the Army with intelligence about Japanese movements. The Coast Watchers would radio Brisbane for help. The journey would be difficult, navigating the shallow coast in native boats, dodging Japanese air patrols at every turn. It was a journey that would take the men over a week to complete. It was August 31st, 1944, 17 days after the USS Flyer sank, and 8 of her survivors were going home. Upon pickup, the Redfin also delivered provisions to the Coast Watchers and guerrillas to whom the Flyers owed their lives, everything from food and firearms to clothing and shoes off the backs of the Redfin's crew. In 2009, while working with the Jacobson family, divers discovered the wreck of the USS Flyer 330 feet beneath the surface of the Balabac Strait. The Navy officially recognized the wreck as the USS Flyer in 2010, a chilling monument to the 78 men who lost their lives that night and remained on the Eternal Patrol.
you get the message. 71 men went to their death instantly. 15 initially got off because they were blown off, and of the 15, 8 survived. One of them being Mr. Jacobson, who did return home. There were some stories in the news about him, probably in the late 90s, and he was always bothered by what happened. How did this happen to us? We're going to change a video here, and I will just tell you some other pieces about what you will be seeing coming up here. As this, Mr. Jacobson had the financial means to hire a team to look for this submarine. And much of what you have seen and what you will be seeing comes from a National Geographic program called the Dive Detectives. And it took a while to find them. They were also looking for another submarine called the Robolo, which again disappeared. But the portion of the video here that I'm going to show you focuses on the silver sides. Excuse me, on the Flyer. Once an exhibit like this comes into place and it becomes known that it's happening, some very interesting things come to the forefront. Excuse me. And some of the stories that came clear out of the blue were very interesting.
Seabed for the gases, Jerry.
I've given her some specific times to, there you go. Okay, there you go, thank you. For instance, as this Flyer exhibit, which is downstairs, was going into production, we would get calls from individuals who wanted to know more about it and who wanted to contribute to it. And in March of 2013, we opened this in May, a lady came in here. She said she lived in Roosevelt Park. She spends the winter in Florida. And her neighbor, a gentleman, said, "Are you from Muskegon?" "Yes. And I understand this museum is going to be doing this exhibit about the Flyer." "Yes." "Well, my brother went down on the Flyer. And I have all these letters. I have all this information. And if you go into that Flyer exhibit, you will see various letters, one specifically being from the U.S. Navy to this seaman's mother, telling her that her son has been lost at sea, doesn't give any details, asks her not to tell anyone that her son or the ship has been lost, because they did not want the Japanese to know that a submarine had been lost. That's just one of the stories. Some other interesting ones, you heard that the ship that picked them up was the Redfin. The Redfin was built across the lake in Manitowoc. And as again this exhibit was moving forth, we ended up getting a phone call from a gentleman in Pennsylvania who said, "I understand you are going to," and yes, we are. He said, "Well," he said, "I have the bell from the Redfin in my barn." Oh, you're kidding me. If you stop to look at it, that is the fairly large, heavy bell that is in the lobby downstairs. And his comment was, "If you are indeed putting this exhibit together, I will give you the bell." Well, we got pretty excited about that, proceeded to go along and finish the exhibit. And how do you get an 80-pound brass bell, which you could probably sell for a lot of money if you melted it down in today's market, right? That never crossed our minds. This is history, it's important. So we kept thinking about how to do this, and the fellow said, "Well, I'll tell you what. I have a friend who's a long-haul truck driver from Minnesota. Maybe we can find a way for him to pick this up and get it to you." Well, that got us pretty turned on to that. And the long and short of it is this fellow Ray and his wife, who are long-haul truck drivers, met this fellow in Pennsylvania. They picked up this bell. Ray's wife told me proudly, she said, I put that bell right there on the floor in the big truck between my legs. We weren't going to let it out of our sight. So now how are we going to get it from there? Well, they were coming back from Pennsylvania, and Jeff Bernstein, who was one of the artists of the exhibit, said, okay, I'll meet him. And literally, it was a 10-minute stop and transfer off of I-90 coming north up towards Kalamazoo, where the truck stopped, Jeff met him, transferred the bell, and I always kind of wondered what would have happened if the state police hadn't come upon that. What are you guys doing with this valuable, valuable bell? So the bell is downstairs. Now, most bells had the date of the christening of the ship on them. This one says 194, not 1940 or 1941 or 42. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One being that at one time bells were used on ships, and please submariners correct me if I go wrong on this, but bells made money, made noise, made money too. See where my head is. Okay, let's melt it, okay. They make noise. So they never imprinted the last letter on that because I think there was some uncertainty about when that ship was going to be commissioned, the Redfin. The Redfin made across the lake, picking up the sailor from Grand Haven, Michigan. There are just so many stories like that that come to the forefront. Now, back to Mr. Jacobson and his wish to find this ship and the commissioning of divers to do that. That's the next part of the story. We wish to show you this, but I have found it fascinating. Others who have seen it have found it fascinating as these pretty brave divers went and found this ship, and you can see the process here at the Silver Sides Museum.
I swam to the surface as fast as I could. "15 people got off the submarine. The submarine Flyer was lost. Tragic situation. Anyway, we swam. I don't know, you'd say, what did you think about, or that? I can't say. All I can say is I repeated the 23rd Psalm so many times that I almost got to be funny, but I did.
Only 8 of the sailors survived the swim to shore. Al Jacobson spent the rest of his life determined to find out about his lost submarine.
Your dad seemed really sure that they had hit a mine. Like, there's absolutely no question in his mind. Well, whatever we find in the wreck, it will clearly tell us what exactly put it on the bottom.
And that was one of the main things he was interested in finding out, and why it would have been so valuable or interesting for him to find out, hopefully, what we might find out, with some evidence of, was it a mine, and where actually did that mine hit.
Al Jacobson and his fellow survivors left detailed eyewitness accounts of where the Flyer went down, and naval reports indicate the sub's last known coordinates.
The one thing that would stick in my mind, if I was a guy, was water depth. That would absolutely stick in my brain.
Well, and they also said land 18,000 yards ahead, which doesn't make sense on this heading.
Okay, and I think this is all great, but at the end of all of this, do we not agree that we're still talking about the same search area when it comes to side-scan sonar?
Yep.
The two sources reveal an unexpectedly small target area, about 3.5 square kilometers. But even this can take days to search.
We know it's at 41 fathoms according to your...
The seabed here drops to 200 meters, beyond the range of the team's side-scan sonar.
Hey! Are you ready to launch it? Yeah, we're ready to go here now. Okay.
The team scanned during daylight and passes the nights on board ship, anchored in the search area. Pirates present a constant danger in the dark isolation of the open seas.
That's why we got our security.
Yeah, pretty weird to think about pirates these days, but it happens.
Oh, for sure. Are we safe? Yes, sir. That's good.
3 guards on rotating shifts, armed with 2 M16s, 2 handguns, and 1 hand grenade, protect the hundreds of thousands of dollars of gear and the 25 souls on board. This scanning technique is like mowing a lawn. Precise to and fro tracks of sonar readings that image the seabed.
You can see the fish is at 24 meters depth at an altitude of 68 meters off the bottom. And this is just an uncluttered sand bottom. We expect it to be completely sandy all the way along.
Suddenly, a large shadow appears on the sonar image.
What is that?
This could be the team's very first look at the USS Flyer.
Well, that particular object measures approximately 90 meters in length, is about 8 meters across, and if you look at that shadow that you see sticking out there. What
Oh
does that
my
look like?
gosh, that is amazing. That looks awfully like a submarine to me. Is that real?
Yeah, that's pretty much.
Oh
So,
my goodness.
let me be the first.
This is fantastic.
Well, and it's amazing to really see the conning tower standing up like that on a submarine. We've dove a lot of submarines that had never been dove before, and a lot of times the conning tower would be broken away because it wasn't really part of the pressure hull.
Unbelievable. I am so thrilled, I can't tell you.
I mean, it looks like a submarine, but is it the Flyer? The only way to know is to dive down there. We'll step.
Yeah, and there's so much that my father was interested in being able to see on the sub as you go around it. I mean, the thing that he always talked about was trying to identify where and if it was a mine that they hit. Was it on the starboard side?
The Fletchers have their target.
We can see a very distinctive side scan image. It's the right shape, the right dimension. If it's a Gato-class submarine, in my mind, it's going to be the Flyer. The big problem is this area is really known for nasty currents, and it's deep. It's really close to 100 meters to the bottom, and that's as deep as I've ever dove. It's right up there with the limits of our training.
The target spotted on the sonar is 100 meters down, but once they're there, Mike and Warren will have only 12 minutes to explore it. Deep dives like this push the limits of the human body. They each carry 4 tanks for the complex mixture of gases they need to breathe at different pressures. At these depths, they are at risk of oxygen poisoning and nitrogen buildup. So they each carry 90 kilograms of gas on their backs as they fight strong currents to reach the bottom. They experience vice-like pressure, 10 kilograms of force per square centimeter on their bodies. The 2-millimeter neoprene wetsuits are compressed to less than a millimeter. All air is crushed out.
It really takes a long time to swim down 100 meters. As I get closer and closer to the bottom, I can see this shape forming in front of me.
On deck, Steve Jacobson waits to learn if the shape really is his father's sub. Hunting for a missing World War II submarine, the Fletchers descend to the bottom. A dark shape comes into focus.
Way off in the distance, I can see a shadowy outline. I'm full of that anticipation, thinking, this is going to be the Flyer.
Immediately, I recognize the deck gun on the bow of the sub. It's got to be a Gato-class submarine. I can tell just the shape and the dimensions.
My feelings are balanced by the fact that you're essentially in a graveyard and only meters away from the graves of dozens of American sailors. I'm constantly drawn back to the relationship between Steve up above us and his deceased father.
They clearly are trying to identify the sub, but at the same time they're being very careful, recognizing that this is a grave site and it's something to be worked with very carefully as an archaeologist would work with it.
They discover the bow of the submarine is gone, back to the first bulkhead, possibly due to impact on the sea floor. They search deeper inside and find forward torpedo tubes stacked in 2 columns of 3, an exact match with Gato-class submarines. This is an important discovery, strongly suggesting it is the USS Flyer. They move along the sub and note the forward deck gun matches the Flyer's gun placement during her last mission. Then they see why this sub went down. Mike swims up to a massive hole ripped in the sub's side.
We could see a huge implosion point on the starboard side. As soon as I saw that, in my mind, we had found the Flyer.
The starboard side hull damage under the conning tower matches Al Jacobson's eyewitness report of the Flyer's last moments. They want to explore more, but they're out of time for this dive. They begin the slow process of ascent and decompression.
The gun, the conning tower.
Is it on an angle or pretty flat?
It's almost
pretty
pulled
flat.
up right. Yeah, it's pretty flat.
Is the whole conning tower intact?
Yep, it's all there. Yeah, which is amazing. You don't see that very often. Okay. I only went to the bow for just a second. I had to make it back.
We were trying hard to stay high in the wreck.
Yeah.
We didn't want to go right to the bottom if we could help it.
Right. So the bow was gone, or it was
basically blown right apart. There are pieces of it there, but you can see that it's all blown apart. So
Mort figured is gone right to the first bulkhead.
When they came up after the first dive and start to describe some of those characteristics which my father had spoken about wanting to know about, you know, were there holes in the ship? It started to become more real that, you know, the sub was actually down there. I was trying to, you know, feel what my dad would have felt, you know, had he been here also, and I think he would have been elated. I know that the things that we've talked about that my dad was most interested in were the hatches and whether or not those were open. And in his mind, if they were open, it may have meant that men tried to get out. Right. And if they were closed, it meant maybe they didn't.
I did have a real tough question after the war. I'm not going to give his name, but the mother and sister of one of the officers just gave me a real tough time about why I didn't know what happened to him. Or maybe he's still alive, or why did we assume that he's dead? And it went down with it. So it was a very tough question to answer.
Well, yeah. I don't think Warren and I have ever investigated a story where there was such a close family emotional tie.
Well, you're seeing one single representative of a lot more people that have a huge vested interest in this. So,
well, we get the sense of that. We get the sense of that from knowing you now and from the accounts that your father left.
Without the accounts of survivors like Al Jacobson, the Flyer would not have been found. To survive, they swam 19 kilometers through treacherous waters to reach land. Using a homemade raft, they island hopped for 5 days in enemy-occupied territory before reaching safety on Bugsuck Island. Only 8 of the men who escaped the sinking survived the journey.
Some were injured. Anyway, we swam. We agreed nobody would help each other. We had another guy. For some reason, he couldn't swim on his stomach. He could only swim on his back, and he couldn't see. Well, we'd swim along, and this one time he got quite a ways from us as a group. So I went over to get him, and I said, "Phil, just rest and put your feet on my shoulder, and I'll push you back to it." Oh, God, he fought. He wouldn't think about it. And so we went back to the group, and less than an hour later, I was looking for him, and he was gone. He just swam off to one side and gave up. The big mistake we all made was we took all our clothes off. I took everything but my skivvy underwear off. We obviously swimming all day, we all got burned up pretty bad. Finally, when daylight came up, we did see the land, and we decided which island we're going to go to.
After 18 hours of swimming, they hoped to find sleep. They dug holes in the sand for shelter.
Night came, and believe me, that is the worst time of the day there is. We were cold. To try to keep warm, we buried ourselves in the sand, and you just prayed all the time for the daylight to come and get the sun to get you warmed up again. Went to bed. You couldn't sleep. So we tried to build a raft. You can call it a raft. There's a lot of bamboo around. Just for something to hang on to.
The men survived 5 days with virtually no food and water in enemy territory before finding rescue at Brooks Point. Local resistance fighters led them to a radio where they contacted the Navy. A submarine was dispatched to collect them. Al Jacobson had always wondered about the fate of the Flyer and the men who died with her. The Fletchers hoped to find some answers for Al's son, Steve. They plan a dive to investigate the sub's escape hatches. Were they open or closed? Despite taking all precautions, the deep dives can still be punishing.
I wonder how many more 300-foot dives I have left. I'm ready to start dialing it back.
Yeah, it's a little bit crazy going that deep, really.
I'm getting to where I can't carry all the gear.
Not getting any younger.
I don't need to be reminded. We're good to go.
The team will once again have only 12 minutes to investigate the sub when they reach their target. A dive line attached to the wreck guides them down. The Flyer sank while she was following a Japanese convoy. Her top decks would have been out of the water, with the hatches most likely closed. Normal operating procedure in dangerous waters. Six minutes into their dive, they locate a forward escape hatch. And it's open.
I know that Al Jacobson was really haunted almost by the fate of his fellow crew members, the guys that never made it to the surface, the guys that didn't get out of that sinking submarine. So for Warren and I to find that open hatch, in my mind, answered a lot of those questions.
This is more than just a ship, it's a grave site, and people died defending their country while on board this submarine. These guys were fighting for their lives, and right up until the last second they were trying to get these hatches open and scramble to the surface. And just to think the number of men that must have died on this submarine, it's really a humbling feeling.
The Fletchers have 3 minutes left to explore the sub, looking for evidence that could categorically confirm it as the USS Flyer.
We've discovered submarines in the past, and the Flyer had a bit of a special place in my heart. Just the fact that Steve and his father Al were so adamant about finding the submarine and learning some of the little details about the story really made it rewarding for me to actually go down there and answer some of the questions that they've had for so long.
The sub is in the right place. It's evidently the right class of vessel, and the damage appears to be consistent with what happened to the Flyer, but no name or number is visible. Mike and Warren's 12 minutes of bottom time are up. They have to start the long process of ascent, stopping a dozen times at regular intervals to ensure the excess helium and nitrogen in their bloodstream releases at a safe and controlled rate.
If they're not careful with their decompression time, they can contract what is known as the bends, which can cause can have very serious consequences. Death is definitely one of them, but it's characterized by pain in the joints, kind of like a bad case of arthritis initially. Okay, divers are up.
Warren reaches the boat, but struggles to get on board. Something is wrong. Warren Fletcher has just ascended 100 meters and is displaying symptoms of the bends.
I'm feeling a little weirdness in this arm.
Are you okay, Warren?
Just weird, achy.
Get on that button.
Mike calls in the ship's medic.
It's 120 over 90. Still in the normal blood pressure.
Breathing oxygen is the primary treatment for Warren's symptoms. Increasing the amount in his system counters the effects of the nitrogen buildup. Warren rests up and is able to join his dad to reveal their discovery to Steve.
There you can see what's left.
That's the forward hatch that your dad asked about. What it tells me is if the hatch is open, then at least that portion of the sub flooded. And the men that were trapped in there as it sank would have died quickly.
Okay.
As opposed to the fact that if that hatch were closed, there would be the possibility that air was trapped inside and took those men alive to the bottom, only to have a much slower and agonizing end.
So what would your father be thinking right now?
I'm sure he, would have a flood of thoughts and emotions going through him, both personal and, for his comrades that were lost.
It was amazing to be there with my dad and to be there with Steve and knowing the relationship that he had with his father. It was really kind of sad for me to think that Steve's dad was so close to surviving to hear that the sub had been found.
It's in exactly the right spot. It's the right style and class of submarine. In my mind, it's a Flyer, and to anyone who wants to look at the evidence, they can decide for themselves.
The U.S. Navy confirmed the discovery. The USS Flyer, lost August 13, 1944. Found for the first time by the dive detectives.
I don't know. Yes, I wondered why I was there. And there's no question about that. If I was given the privilege of surviving this, I'm a damn lucky guy to be alive, and I better do something to justify the fact that I'm alive, yes.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's the story of the USS Flyer, and like I said, it is his story, and it's quite a story. And one of those veterans who did survive. It's the only known surviving of submariners in a situation like that. Yes, others got off, were captured, eventually made their way out. So, any questions, any comments, any reflections that you wish to make at this time? Yes, sir.
One of the things that really impressed me was the fact that these guys went for 5 days without water, without panicking, and apparently listening very well to some of their officers. They had the cohesion to make that decision. On the Indianapolis, a lot of the sailors that ended up in the water panicked, and they started using the seawater because they thought that was going to help them out, and they ended up going delirious and drowning. Whereas in this situation, the guys stayed together, followed their instructions, and did survive for the 5 days without water.
The book verifies that or supports what you're saying. The explosion and the way that it came across, the escape of air from the submarine literally blew these men off the deck. And there were men who were in the control room on a ladder, and were blown out. It's just so hard for me to understand or to almost believe that, because you know how small those hatches are. And to be blown out of there by this exhaust, actually a few of them who did that survived. Paul.
That pressure would send a solid stream of water. They would have had no choice. The water had flooded in, and the pressure from the explosion is like a hose, just like you're sitting in the middle of a hose. It'll hose you out of there.
And they were all skinny 18-year-olds.
I'm sorry?
And they were all skinny 18-year-olds.
Yes, skinny 18-year-old.
Do you have
yes.
a question?
Did you meet the Filipinos who were
Yes.
here? You want to tell me that story?
Yes, yes. This story makes reference to the Coast Watchers, a group of Filipinos who were American trained to be, let's call them spies for the United States, if you will, report upon Japanese movements. And Peg, it's really more Peg's story. Oh, Peg is below, okay. And through just research, she found families of some of the original Coast Watchers in Milwaukee, George, or in Chicago? Milwaukee. In Milwaukee. And they came here for the opening, and they're just some great stories, the memories that they had, the people that they met, the messages that were written on a peso, I think it was, and from one person to another, and there's pictures of them giving that back. So they just go on. Barbara.
Paul and I were here that day, and after all the ceremonies, and there were folks up here having lunch, and we were just walking through the exhibit, and there was there was a young man with two elderly folk, a lady and a man, who were Asian, and they asked us if we knew where the family was, and we said, well, they're upstairs. And they said, the young man said, this is my uncle who was with the crew when they found them. And they were afraid of us until he handed his gun to one of the survivors. Whether it was Jacobson or not, we don't know. But he handed his gun to them so that they would not be afraid, so they could take them in.
There's a reference made to them finding a well, a cistern. The first time that they would reach water or find water in about 5 days. They learned later from the coast watchers that when they left that area, which was a farm, that they poisoned that well with arsenic because they didn't want the Japanese, or if they figured if the Japanese were using it, they would suffer from it. As it turned out, one of the Flyer crew did drink from that, and he did get ill, but he did survive. Much more to the story, much more to the story. Well, George, I'll turn it back to you.
Well, it's quite a story, and obviously we are lucky to have that exhibit, and if you want to explore more, that's part of your membership. Check out our museum. Riker Morningstar, would you please come up here? Every once in a while, students fascinate us with the things they do and the things they undertake. Riker, would you tell us what you're up against or what you're doing?
So, as a class, we decided to donate $100 for one of the bricks that will be on the Walk of Honor in the Michigan World War II Memorial. And the class raised a total of $105 that we will be donating to the memorial. And on the brick, we will, the inscription will say, "We thank our Michigan World War II veterans." So, are there any World War II veterans? If you would please stand, we'd like to thank you, and this brick is our thanks to you for your service in World War II.
Thank you, Ryan. That was Riker. That's really something else. I'm a little choked up about it. They ever say that students don't do good things, or the youth of today doesn't have its best interests at heart, I contradict that. Okay, well, I told you we have a big surprise. Now, this has taken some effort to pull off. We had to make some phone calls today. Police had to be contacted. Permissions had to be secured because we have a secret weapon that was used on D-Day, and we were lucky to have come across this weapon. If we would, I'm going to get the clicker back. Well, we lost it. There it is. Let me go through this presentation for you. Over the last 15 weeks, we've been talking about innovation, courage, valor, thinking out of the box. These are all traits of the world's greatest generation. We talk about little people doing heroic things. And we talk about collective efforts being important to that process. And one of the things we were able to come across was unique and forgotten stories of weaponry and tales of valor. One of these tales pivoted around D-Day, June 6, 1944. Now, we talked extensively about D-Day in the course. We talked about the preparations. I think Kurt gave you background, and we heard from some of our speakers how this all came together. the planning, the meticulous thought behind this. Units training for days, weeks, months on end. Everybody knowing their part and place. Units having exhaustive lists, making sure that they took the right equipment, they had the right things at the right time. Sometimes having too much equipment and other times not having enough equipment because they didn't know what they were going to get into. In the past, this has been a problem because previous invasions, the Dieppe invasion in 1942, was such a fiasco. Canadian troops, along with British commandos, had been sent to France, hoping to have a preemptive raid, and 2/3 were either killed or captured. And that fiasco continued to resonate in minds of that event. Now we're fortunate tonight to have this secret weapon available. Now I have one of my colleagues, you have not met him yet. His name is Jeff Johnson. He's from the technical department, CAD department, computer aided design, who's an engineer, and he's been checking on this secret weapon because, you know, we want to make sure nobody is hurt. We let this thing go, we want to see that, you know, you all survive. So I need your attention, please. Please don't do anything rash. Don't run to windows. Don't look out at the channel. Stay in your seats. Make sure you are in a safe place. Follow all instructions at all times, because once we conduct this test of this weapon, and it hasn't been used in a simulated combat experience since World War II. We are fortunate to have this weapon here tonight. So, the story pivots around Major Simon Fraser. Well, as you can discern, his noble title was the Lord Lovat. He was a 25th generation Scottish clan leader from Scotland. And you know, back from the days of William Wallace, the Scots have always been known as tenacious fighters. Colorful people. People that you could count on in a good fight. Well, the Lord Lovat was a kind of guy who was definitely a good fighter. He used to go into combat with a .30 caliber hunting rifle. He was looking for a fight. He wouldn't back down. He was preparing his British Special Service Brigade, many of them which were veterans of the Dieppe raid. He had been at Dieppe. He understood the fiascos of poor planning, and he wanted to make sure his men were prepared. He had insights that other people, other leaders didn't have, because he was experienced. So when he prepared his troops, they entered the landing craft on that fateful morning of June 6th to land on Sword Beach. He understood what he was facing. He knew that his troops had to do their job. One of their objectives was to hit that beach, secure the beach, and eventually make their way inland to secure a bridge heading over the Cane Channel. It's called the Pegasus Bridge. Now, here's the guys. These are the British commandos. They're in the boat, going towards that particular beachhead. Now, I'm going to ask the museum staff, make sure, you know, Mr. Johnson, is he secured that weapon back there? Is he, I don't want to hear any retort or flash or anything. We don't want anybody getting injured. Everybody's, face me. Don't be looking. Eyes front, folks. Here. Go, okay. There's the secret weapon. This is my colleague, Jeff Johnson. Would you want to talk a little bit about the pipes and why they were the secret weapon on D-Day?
You need to go back many, many years, 500 years. What I have on is not a costume of the Celts. What I have on is not a costume of the Celts. It is their traditional wear. And when you put on a kilt, it represents many things. For the Scots, it represents life, liberty, and if anybody's done any research, freedom. That's what they stood for. I have the rare privilege today to tell you that 71 years ago tomorrow, my father actually signed up, and that's kind of an emotional night for me. But my father actually signed up and became a gunner, 20mm gunner on a troop carrier in 1943. In 1997, he passed away, and I was able to meet another great war veteran, the Honorable Judge Fred Lewis, who actually taught me how to play the pipes. And I know he's local here, and Fred had many, many stories. But to go back to the pipes, it's an instrument of war. It's the only instrument that anyone has died for. 16th century, the magistrate of the English court came up to a piper. They captured him in York. They convicted him. They hung him for playing the pipes. And at that point, declared it an instrument of war. So, you don't do that to the Scots. But what happened is, from that point on, it became their instrument and their symbol of their freedom. So, over 1,000 pipers died in World War I, and all they had was this, jumping out of foxholes, going in and fighting. World War II, as you'll see here in a second, was Piper Bill Miller. He was the same way. He actually went out onto the beach in Normandy. His pipes, his kilt, and all he did was he piped up and down the beach just to give encouragement to the people, to his troops going out. And then later on, he actually piped across this bridge. He led, and they couldn't figure out why he was never shot. So they actually captured a couple of German snipers, and what they found out is, why didn't you ever shoot me? And they go, because you're Dummkopf. That's where he got the name, the Mad Piper.
Well, we're going to share with you a story about the Mad Piper. If you click on the hyperlink on the next, let me get the next slide up there. This is a Dan Rather interview with Bill Millen, Private Bill Millen of the 21st Highlanders.
Of course, November 11th isn't the only day of remembrance. Every battle of every war has an anniversary. This past June 6th, the day we call D-Day, a man in a wheelchair led a procession of bagpipers on a march along the beaches of Normandy, France. 66 years ago, all the world's attention was focused here. The Allied forces were making their major push against Nazi Germany. And today's guest of honor, 87-year-old Bill Millen, was there. Millen would earn fame for his exploits on the battlefield. He was armed only with a knife and a set of bagpipes. You may know his story from the iconic 1962 film, The Longest Day.
I told you I heard bagpipes. It's the reinforcements.
Millen was the personal piper for Lord Lovat, a dashing Scottish nobleman who led a team of British commandos onto the beaches of Normandy that day. Bill Millen recalled Lovat's instructions to him in a taped interview from 1993.
He said, well, a Scotsman is going to lead the invasion, and a Scots piper is going to lead those 2 million men into Hitler's Europe. And that was a job they gave me.
These are the images that come to mind when we think of D-Day. Soldiers wading ashore against a hailstorm of German bullets.
Lots of chaps were killed coming off the ramp of the landing craft. The snipers killing them. The chap beside me who had said, well, cheers in, and he was hit in the mouth and fell off the side. Well, that first day, they reckoned that we lost about half the brigade.
Amazingly, someone took a photograph of Millen as he prepared to go ashore. In this fuzzy image, you can just see the tips of his bagpipes. As Millen tells the story, keeping his pipes dry was his foremost concern as he struggled through the roiling surf. After hitting the beach, he marched up and down, urging his comrades on with his music. Despite how absurd all this may sound to us today, Bill Millen was continuing a centuries-long tradition of bagpipes in war. Their unmistakable timbre was easily heard above the din of battle for miles. They could signal to allies that reinforcements were on the way. In the First World War, hundreds of British pipers were killed in the trenches, and as a result, they were prohibited from the front lines for World War II. But not Bill Millen. Lord Lovat told him, that's the English War Office. You and I are both Scottish, and that doesn't apply.
I can send it to you as well on an email form.
There was a special urgency to the D-Day gathering this year. Bill Millen's Piper friends had been raising money, hoping to build a statue in his honor. Millen's health was failing, and they had hoped to have it up in time for this year's celebration. But the fundraising hadn't been strong enough.
Welcome to this concert as a tribute to our D-Day Piper, Bill Millen.
In the spirit of maybe next year, the Pipers held a benefit concert. Millen signed autographs, posed for pictures, and greeted his fans, many of them local Frenchmen who told him they were grateful for the part he played in liberating their homeland.
And so we are here to pay tribute to all these young men who died for our freedom.
The Pipers gathered at the Normandy American Cemetery and Memorial. Nearly 10,000 Americans are buried here. Most died on D-Day and the ensuing battles. Overlooking the grounds is a symbolic statue which portrays the spirit of American youth rising from the waves. More than a quarter of a century ago, President Ronald Reagan came to Normandy for the 40th anniversary of D-Day. He spoke of the heroism of individuals including the many exploits of a young Scottish piper.
You remember the story of Bill Millen of the 51st Highlanders? 40 years ago today, British troops were pinned down near a bridge waiting desperately for help. Suddenly they heard the sound of bagpipes, and some thought they were dreaming. Well, they weren't. They looked up and saw Bill Millen with his bagpipes leading the reinforcements and ignoring the smack of the bullets into the ground around him.
This was the battle for Pegasus Bridge, also depicted in the Hollywood film The Longest Day. Bill Millen is no longer able to play the bagpipes, but in past years he often traveled to Normandy on the anniversary of D-Day to make the ceremonial march across this bridge, playing his pipes as he did those many years ago. On this day, others provided the music, but Millen still led the way. A few weeks after this ceremony, we traveled to Millen's home in southern England. Bill wanted to show us one of his favorite spots by the sea.
Southside, walk along there.
It was clear that his health had diminished considerably. And a few weeks later, he died. He had just turned 88 years old. Bill Millen may very well be the last man ever to lead an army into battle playing the bagpipes. Millen's friends are hopeful that one day soon there will be a statue of him here. And maybe, just maybe, a young child passing by will see it and stop for a moment to wonder who this man was.
They did build the statue. Unfortunately, Bill didn't see it, but it is there.
That's our program for tonight.
Thank you. Well, Dan gets the last word in all the time. It would be appropriate for the memory of Bill and all of our other fallen World War II veterans to play a tune on the pipes. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. And I'll ask my colleague Jeff to strike it up for you. These are the reasons why our programs are so much better. We have experiential learning. Well, like everything has to come to an end eventually. We put a little montage together for you this evening. A montage that I think summarizes this semester and the activities that we've seen. So I'll let the show tell the story. You've heard enough from me tonight.
Thanks for the memory of sentimental verse.
nothing in my purse, and chuckles when the preacher said, for better or for worse.
How lovely it was. Thanks for the memory of Schubert's serenade, little things of jade, and traffic jams, and anagrams, and bills we never paid.
How lovely it was. We who could laugh over big things were parted by only a slight thing.
I wonder if we did the right thing. Oh, well, that's life, I guess.
I love your dress.
Do you?
It's pretty.
Thanks for the memory of faults that you forgave, rainbows on a wave,
and stockings in the basin when a fellow needs a shave. Thank you so much.
Thanks for the memory of tinkling temple bells, alma mater, yeah,
and Cuban rum and towels from the very best hotels.
How lovely it was. Thanks for the memory of cushions on the floor, hash with Diddy Moore, that pair of gay pajamas that you bought and never wore.
Say, by the way, whatever became of those pajamas?
Huh?
Huh?
We said goodbye with a highball.
Then I got as high as a steeple.
Did you?
But we were intelligent people.
No tears, no fuss.
Hooray for us.
Strictly ingenue. Darling, how are you?
And how are all those little dreams that never did come true?
Awfully glad I met you.
Cheerio, toodaloo.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being the best audience. Well, on that note, toodaloo.